The quiet within the chapel was nearly suffocating, broken only by the soft rustle of dark attire and the hushed sounds of stifled tears. The air carried the faint fragrance of white lilies, intertwined with the oppressive burden of mourning. Everyone had come to bid farewell to a hero. At the heart of the aisle, under the gentle glow of stained glass windows filtering the morning light, rested a polished oak coffin. A carefully folded flag lay atop it, a testament to honor, to sacrifice. Yet, for those who truly knew Nathaniel Harper, none of this felt just. He had endured blasts, ambushes, and bitter desert nights, only to lie here now, still, cold, without a final word. His comrades stood in disciplined rows, their expressions rigid, their jaws clenched, none daring to falter. But their eyes revealed the anguish they bore. In the front pew, a woman with neatly pinned chestnut hair gripped a soaked tissue in her trembling hands. Clara, Elijah's sister, was the embodiment of sorrow. Yet no one in that sacred space felt the loss more profoundly than Atlas, the German Shepherd K9, stationed at the chapel's entrance. His leash was held tightly by the officer who had brought him. Atlas's chest heaved quickly, as if he sensed something was terribly wrong but couldn't grasp why. He sniffed the air, scanning the room for a clue, a sign. When his soulful brown eyes fixed on the casket, something within him changed. Atlas stiffened, his ears perked, his gaze unwavering on Elijah's motionless form. Then, without warning, he did the unthinkable. With a sudden, frantic tug, Atlas broke free from the officer's hold. His nails clicked sharply against the polished floor as he bolted down the aisle, his body taut with purpose. Before anyone could intervene, he leaped. Gasps rippled through the chapel as Atlas landed inside the coffin. The flag shifted slightly under the impact, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if Elijah might stir. Atlas curled against his soldier's chest, sniffing desperately, waiting for a sign. A low, mournful whine escaped him, laden with longing, with grief. Then he rested his head on Elijah's shoulder and shut his eyes. In that instant, something extraordinary happened, something that stole the breath from everyone in the room. What followed left no one untouched. This was only the beginning. If this story moved you, help me reach 100K subscribers. Leave a like and subscribe now to join this milestone. The chapel was steeped in a silence so heavy it pressed against the lungs, making it hard to draw breath. Atlas lay across Elijah's still form, his head nestled against his soldier's shoulder, as if urging him to rise. His body quivered faintly, his ears twitching at the soft echoes of muffled sobs around him. Trained for combat, for peril, for loyalty, he was unprepared for this moment. His partner, his handler, his entire world was gone, and he couldn't fathom why. A stifled sob broke the stillness. Clara, Elijah's sister, clutched the pew's edge as if it anchored her to reality. Her face was ashen, her eyes red from endless tears. Around her, soldiers sat motionless, their uniforms pristine, their hands clasped tightly. They had fought beside Elijah, seen him brave the worst of war and return. But nothing had readied them for Atlas pressed against his chest, unwilling to let go. An officer stepped forward cautiously, reaching for Atlas's collar, but the dog emitted a deep, protective growl, not hostile, but pleading. His grip on Elijah's uniform tightened, claws pressing into the fabric as if to hold fast to the man who had been his everything. The officer paused, then withdrew his hand. No one could bear to force Atlas away. "Let him stay," Chaplain Bennett said softly, his voice steady yet heavy with finality. "He's mourning, just like us." Clara wiped her tears with unsteady fingers, her voice barely audible. "He doesn't understand. He thinks Elijah will come back." Her words lingered, suffocating. Atlas let out a faint whimper and nudged Elijah's arm with his nose, as he had done on battlefields when his handler was down. A signal. "Get up, soldier." But there was no answer. Then, abruptly, Atlas's body tensed. His ears perked, his breathing shallowed. His head lifted slightly, his dark eyes fixed on something distant, something unseen. A chill swept through the room, subtle but enough to raise the hairs on Clara's neck. Atlas wasn't merely looking, he was tracking. Clara swallowed hard, glancing at the chaplain, then back at Atlas. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her voice faint. Atlas didn't respond. He didn't move. He just stared. A cold stillness enveloped the chapel. Atlas remained rigid, his body alert, ears forward, his deep brown eyes locked on an invisible presence. The grief in the room was still palpable, but now something else crept in, something intangible, unsettling. Clara wiped her tear-streaked cheeks and followed Atlas's gaze, but saw only the casket, the flag, the dim flicker of candles. Her pulse raced. Soldiers exchanged wary glances. This wasn't typical. Atlas was a disciplined canine. He wouldn't react this way without cause. Sergeant Marcus Tate, who had served with Elijah abroad, cleared his throat. "What's he seeing?" His voice was rough, tinged with unease and awe. No one replied. The silence stretched. Atlas didn't blink, his breathing steady but intent, as if sensing something beyond human perception. Then, suddenly, he let out a soft, breathy whine. Different from his earlier cries, quieter, curious. His tail twitched faintly. He raised his head higher, ears shifting as if catching a distant sound. Then he eased, not completely, but enough for those nearby to notice. Clara's throat tightened. "Atlas," she whispered, stepping closer, but the dog ignored her. For a moment, he seemed elsewhere, somewhere beyond the chapel, beyond sorrow, beyond death itself. The chaplain inhaled sharply, his hands gripping the small Bible he held, his fingers trembling. "Sometimes," he murmured, almost to himself, "dogs see what we cannot." His words sent a shiver through the room. Some soldiers shifted uncomfortably, others sat frozen, watching Atlas with a mix of curiosity and dread. Then, as quickly as it began, Atlas blinked and exhaled deeply. His body softened, his tail curled loosely. He turned to Elijah's face one last time, then rested his head on his chest. The room held its breath, waiting for more, but nothing came. Clara exhaled shakily and approached, her fingers brushing Atlas's fur. He didn't flinch. Whatever he had sensed, if anything, had passed. Yet the strange shift in the air lingered, and no one dared speak of it. The chapel remained cloaked in silence, heavy and unyielding. No one stirred, no one spoke. Even the air felt altered, denser, charged with something unseen. Atlas lay still, pressed against Elijah, his breathing slow and deep, as if the full weight of grief had settled upon him. Clara knelt beside the casket, her fingers tangled in Atlas's fur, her hands trembling, her breaths uneven. She had spent days trying to accept her brother's death, but watching Atlas's sorrow made it feel like losing Elijah anew. She wanted to reassure him, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she promise what she doubted herself? Sergeant Carter cleared his throat, his voice strained. "Atlas has never done this before." His eyes flicked between the dog and Elijah's still form, uncertainty clouding his face. The other soldiers nodded silently. They had seen Atlas in battle, fierce, focused, unyielding. Now, he looked broken, lost. It was a sight none were prepared for. The chaplain shifted, his voice low. "Dogs don't grieve like we do," he said, almost to himself, "but they feel loss." His fingers tightened around the Bible. "Sometimes they hold on longer than we expect." His words trailed off, his expression distant. Then Atlas stirred, slowly, reluctantly. He lifted his head, gazing at Elijah's face. A soft whimper escaped as he nudged his soldier's chin with his nose. A pause, a moment of stillness. Then, in one fluid motion, he sat upright, ears high, posture alert. The change was subtle but striking, as if he awaited something, a command, an order, permission to stand down. Clara's breath caught. She turned to the chaplain, her voice a whisper. "Is he?" She couldn't finish, but the chaplain understood. He exhaled slowly, his gaze softening as he looked at Atlas. Then, in a steady, low voice, he spoke the words no one else could. "At ease, soldier." Atlas's ears twitched. His eyes lingered on Elijah's face for a long, agonizing moment. Then his muscles relaxed, his tail uncurled slightly, his breathing slowed. It was as if he had finally received the order to let go. Clara wiped her eyes, barely containing a sob. The soldiers watched in silence as Atlas gently rested his head one last time, not waiting for Elijah to wake, but saying farewell. The weight in the chapel was crushing, a sorrow deeper than grief, heavier than loss. The moment before goodbye, a silence that stretched endlessly, as if time itself paused in reverence. Atlas, once taut with resistance, now lay still, his head against Elijah's chest, eyes open, watching. Clara knelt beside the casket, her hands still in Atlas's fur, her tears exhausted. She had always believed death was final, that the departed were simply gone. But Atlas's steadfast devotion made her question that. Perhaps love, true, unshakable love, didn't vanish. Perhaps it lingered, refusing to fade. Sergeant Carter, standing nearby, exhaled sharply. He had seen soldiers break in combat, collapse under loss, but nothing had prepared him for this. His throat tightened as he stepped forward, placing a steady hand on Atlas's back. The dog didn't stir, just breathed slowly, as if cherishing every moment with his fallen partner. The chaplain, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, spoke softly. Atlas's duty was to protect Elijah, he said. Now he's ensuring he gets home safely. Clara nodded, her heart aching at the truth in those words. Atlas had stood by Elijah through war, through danger, through every trial. Even now, in death, he wouldn't abandon him. The officer holding Atlas's leash hesitated, then took a deep breath. Come on, buddy, he whispered gently, reaching for the collar. For a moment, it seemed Atlas wouldn't budge, his body pressed against Elijah as if he could hold on forever. Then, with a slow, deep sigh, his ears twitched, his tail flicked faintly, and he shifted. Clara's breath hitched as Atlas lifted his head, his eyes lingering on Elijah's face, searching, remembering. With one final nudge against his soldier's chest, he stepped back, slow but deliberate. He wasn't being forced. He was choosing to let go. The chapel was silent as Atlas descended from the casket. Soldiers straightened. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her lips, and the chaplain bowed his head, murmuring a quiet prayer. Atlas sat at the casket's foot, his posture proud, strong, but different now. He wasn't waiting, wasn't searching. He was simply there, honoring the man who had been his partner, his protector, his everything. The moment everyone dreaded had arrived. The funeral had to proceed. Atlas showed that true love endures beyond death. Do you believe the bond between humans and animals transcends life? Share your thoughts in the comments. The chapel doors creaked open, admitting a gust of cold air that sent a shiver through the room. No one moved. The funeral was about to begin, and Nathaniel Harper would soon be laid to rest. Clara straightened, wiping away her final tears. Her brother had been many things, soldier, guardian, friend. But above all, he had been hers. The pain in her chest was unbearable, but as she looked at Atlas, now sitting quietly by the casket, she found the strength to breathe. He wasn't just Elijah's partner. He was family, and now he, too, was grieving. The chaplain cleared his throat and stepped forward, his voice steady yet laced with emotion. Today, we gather not only to honor Sergeant Nathaniel Harper's service, but to remember the man he was, courageous, loyal, selfless. He paused, glancing at the folded flag atop the casket. He gave his life for others, not out of duty, but out of choice. The soldiers remained rigid, their discipline unwavering, but their faces betrayed their sorrow, eyes glistening, jaws tight. They had fought beside Elijah, seen him risk everything without hesitation. Now, they had to say goodbye. The sharp sound of boots on the polished floor echoed as the honor guard stepped forward, their movements precise. With slow, careful reverence, they lifted the flag from Elijah's casket. The crisp folds, the silent ritual. It was a ceremony performed countless times, but today it felt unique. He wasn't just another soldier. He was theirs. As the flag was raised, Atlas let out a faint whimper, barely audible but enough to pierce the room. Clara drew a sharp breath, her fingers digging into her dress. He knows, she thought. An officer knelt before Clara, presenting the folded flag in gloved hands, his voice firm yet gentle. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of your loved one's honorable and faithful service. Clara's trembling hands took the flag, clutching it tightly to her chest. It was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. A final gift. A final farewell. Then the first shot rang out. The 21-gun salute shattered the silence, each blast slicing through the air like a pulse. The soldiers outside fired in perfect unison, their faces impassive. Clara flinched with each shot, but Atlas remained still, his gaze fixed on the casket, ears high. He didn't flinch, didn't whine. He watched, as if standing guard one last time. Then came the sound that broke them all, a lone, haunting note. The bugler raised his trumpet, pressing it to his lips, and began to play taps. The melody drifted through the chapel, slow and sorrowful, each note sinking into the hearts of those who listened. Atlas's head lowered, his ears drooped, his once tense body seemed to soften as the song neared its end. As the final note faded, Atlas did something unexpected. He lay down beside the casket, pressing close to where Elijah rested, and let out a deep, heavy sigh, not of sorrow, but of acceptance. The last echoes of taps dissolved into the cold air, leaving a silence so profound it felt suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the wind outside seemed to still, as if the world itself mourned Sergeant Nathaniel Harper. Atlas remained by the casket, his body pressed against it, refusing to let go. His breathing was steadier now, but his eyes carried a distant grief. Trained to fight, to protect, to never leave his handler's side, he now faced a void. No orders, no mission, just an endless emptiness. Clara sat clutching the folded flag, its warmth fading in her hands. Her fingers trembled as she traced its folds, her throat tight with the reality that Elijah was truly gone. No calls, no letters, just this flag, this funeral, this absence. Sergeant Carter stepped forward, his voice heavy with grief. "We should take Atlas outside," he said, glancing at the chaplain. "The service is nearly done." Clara looked at Atlas, still curled protectively by the casket. Gently, she reached out, her fingers brushing his fur. "Atlas," she whispered. The dog didn't respond. Carter knelt beside him, his movements careful. "Come on, buddy," he said softly. "It's time to go." Atlas stirred, but not out of obedience, out of reluctance. Slowly, he lifted his head, ears flicking back as if listening for something beyond reach. After one last nuzzle against the casket, he rose. A ripple of relief passed through the chapel, but then Atlas did something that stopped Clara's heart. He turned away from the casket, took 3 steps, then abruptly turned back. His ears perked, his tail wagged once, as if he'd heard a call, seen a sign. Clara's breath caught. Carter's brow furrowed. The chaplain whispered a prayer. Atlas lingered, his brown eyes fixed on something unseen. Then the moment passed. He lowered his head, accepting the farewell, and moved toward the chapel doors. The chapel doors groaned as they opened, letting in a rush of cold air. Atlas stepped forward, his paws silent on the polished floor. As he crossed the threshold, a shiver ran through Clara. The weight of the ceremony, the loss, the finality pressed down, but something else lingered, something inexplicable. She clutched the flag tighter, watching Atlas pause just outside. He turned slightly, looking not at the people, not at the casket, but at the empty space near the altar. His ears twitched, his posture stiffened. It was brief, but Clara saw it, and she knew Carter did too. He inhaled sharply, glancing between Atlas and the empty space. "You saw that, right?" he muttered. Clara nodded, speechless. The chaplain, silent since taps, spoke softly. "Sometimes," he said, "love doesn't leave so easily." His words chilled Clara. She had never believed in spirits, in things beyond this world, but Atlas's glance, his faint tail flick, it unnerved her. Outside, the funeral procession waited, soldiers in perfect formation, the hearse gleaming under the afternoon sun, ready to carry Elijah to his final rest. It was time. The world moved on, but Atlas stood frozen at the doorway, his eyes fixed on the empty space inside. Clara swore she saw something flicker in them, recognition, longing, or perhaps peace. Then, with a slow breath, Atlas lowered his head and stepped into the light. Clara followed, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she had witnessed. Maybe nothing, maybe grief's illusion, or maybe Elijah hadn't truly left. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The flag in Clara's arms grew heavier with each step, as if carrying Elijah's absence. The honor guard stood solemnly, a reminder of duty and sacrifice. Atlas walked beside her, his movements steady but subdued, his alertness dimmed, ears slightly lowered, tail still. He had followed Elijah through war, chaos, danger, and now he followed him one last time. The casket was placed precisely above the open grave, and the chaplain stepped forward, his voice steady despite the sorrow. Sergeant Nathaniel Harper gave his life to his country, his comrades, and the unbreakable bond with his K-9 partner. He glanced at Atlas, his eyes softening. That bond endures even now. Clara's throat tightened. The soldiers stood motionless, their grief tangible. Carter kept his hands clasped, jaw tight, eyes on the casket. No matter how many funerals, it never grew easier. Then Atlas did something that stole Clara's breath. He stepped forward to the casket, nose twitching as he sniffed the wood. His eyes held something beyond sorrow, understanding. He exhaled slowly, then stood tall, proud, and with deliberate care, placed his paw gently on the casket. The cemetery fell silent. Soldiers wiped their eyes. Clara pressed her lips to hold back a sob. Carter took a shaky breath. Even the chaplain paused, respecting the moment. Atlas lingered, unmoving, not pleading, not crying, but fulfilling a final act of loyalty, one last mission, one last vow. Then, quietly, he lowered his paw and stepped back, sitting at Clara's feet, head high, body still. He had done his duty. He had said goodbye. Clara reached down, her fingers in his fur, her voice a whisper. Good boy. The wind stirred, rustling the grass, carrying echoes of a life well lived. In that moment, Clara felt something, warm, familiar, a presence beside them, just for a second. But when she looked, there was nothing. Only the flag, the silent strength of a dog who had lost his partner, and the certainty that some bonds never break. The funeral ended. The soldiers gave their final salute. The flag was folded and presented with precision. The sound of boots faded across the cemetery, leaving Clara, Atlas, and the weight of an ending they weren't ready for. Clara stood staring at the fresh earth where her brother rested. The world felt emptier, quieter. She had known this moment was coming, but its finality was unbearable. Beside her, Atlas sat still, gazing at the gravestone, as if awaiting one last order. She knelt, her fingers in his fur. He's not coming back, boy, she whispered, voice breaking. I know you don't understand, but... She stopped, throat tight. Did she understand? Did anyone? Atlas exhaled slowly, his body easing. The grief remained, heavy, deep, but something in him had shifted. He was no longer searching, no longer waiting, just remembering. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the wind through the trees. She thought of Elijah, his laugh, his stubbornness, how he always made her feel safe, no matter the distance. She thought of Atlas's glance in the chapel, his paw on the casket, so gentle, so deliberate, as if saying, I was here. I was yours. A tear fell, but not just from sorrow, from something lighter. Maybe love didn't end in death. Maybe some souls stayed near, watching, protecting, waiting. Atlas lifted his head, ears twitching, staring briefly at the empty space by Elijah's grave. His tail flicked once, then he turned away, standing steadily. Clara exhaled, giving him a soft pat. Come on, boy. Let's go home. Atlas hesitated, then followed, his steps lighter, head higher. He had spent his life following Elijah, and now, for the first time, he moved forward alone. But as they walked away, Clara felt it again, a fleeting warmth, quiet, unseen. A goodbye, or perhaps a promise that they'd meet again. Some bonds never break. Atlas's loyalty and Elijah's sacrifice will endure forever. If this story touched you, leave a like to honor their bond. Subscribe for more powerful stories, and share in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a love like this? Turn on notifications.